众朋友们，大家好，欢迎在今天晚上收看官网的直播。时间飞逝，转眼间，俄乌冲突已经迈入了3周年的门槛。近日，相关各方是动作不断，似乎一切都在预示着有解决的迹象。面对这一巨变关口，我们非常有幸请到了中俄欧3位嘉宾，跟大家分享他们的观点。他们分别是俄罗斯哲学家、政治理论家亚历山大·杜金，法国巴黎政治学院教授、Horizon 主编、前联合国联大主席、前塞尔维亚外长伍克·杰雷米克，以及上海外国语大学杰出教授黄晶。下面我们把时间交给3位嘉宾。
Let me introduce two of our guests for this discussion. We know that Mr. Alexander Dugin, or Professor Dugin, is a very famous philosopher and scholar in Russia. And of course, we know that some people may think that his view is a little bit extremist, but he's well known and well respected. We also know that Mr. Vuk Jeremish used to be foreign minister of Serbia, and also he was president of United Nations Assembly from I think 2012 to 2013. Now he's a professor in Paris Sciences Po, and also the chief editor of this magazine called Horizon, which focuses on international affairs. Also very well known and very well respected, even though I know that two of them may have some different opinions on the issues we're going to discuss. Myself, I'm a distinguished professor at Shanghai International Studies, and it's my pleasure and privilege to have discussion with two guys. Now let's cut into the topic on the talk. We know that the Munich Security Conference just finished was a disaster from European and Ukraine's perspective. It was a disaster because not just because Vice President Vance has really been quite unfriendly towards people sitting, listening to his speech, towards his host, but he actually, present a picture or situation which is quite, in my view, make the audience quite upset. Three issues we're going to talk about. First, I think it's a historical moment that Munich conference, in its report, says that we have entered a multipolar world. In my view, this is unprecedented because we know Rubio already said it's a multipolar world, and now Munich also said multipolar world, which means the United States has given up its hegemony to great extent, because if multipolar world, then there's no so-called leadership hegemony. It's not unipolar anymore. That's very significant to me. And secondly, we know that before the Munich conference, United States already offered or presented their plan or their solution for the Ukraine war. That is unrealistic for Ukraine to return to NATO, unrealistic to return to the border before 2014, and NATO cannot be involved after the peace is achieved. And moreover, President Donald Trump even said it was a mistake to exclude Russia from G7. He wanted to invite Russia back to G8, which means he recognized Russia's status as a great power, because we know President Biden used to say that Russia is an outcast in the international community, but now it's no longer outcast. They have to invite Russia back to G8. That is a fundamental change, even bigger in my view than those proposals on Ukraine war. And of course, we know this was quite unacceptable towards European side, and of course also Ukraine side. That's why they immediately have a roundtable initiated by Macron to say how and by what means the Europeans can respond to such a sellout. That's my understanding. Let's start from here. Now, I want to hear from two of you. What's your view from this Munich Security Conference? What does this conference tells you about? Basically, how do you comment on this? Let's start from Vuk or Mr. Jeremy, because I think you were there, right? You had the media conference.
I'm going to, out of huge respect that I have Professor Dugin, who's not only very well known in Russia, he's very well known and respected in Serbia as well. I'm going to let him speak out of great respect that I have for him, and then I'll answer after him.
Okay, then Professor Dugin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeremich, for your kind words. Thank you, our host, to invite me to speak about such important topics. I could not agree that my views are too extreme. So I think they are just ahead of the time, because I have, starting from the beginning of the 80s, in Soviet Union, I've started to describe the reality of the future, and I proceeded in that, and in some intervals, reality was almost like that. So I'm a kind of that is why my ideas seem to be extreme, because they are just ahead of time. So I think I say the things that have not already happened, but they will happen sooner or later. That is special attitude, because I don't try to divine, to predict something, to be wrong or to be right. That's something different. I'm trying to discover the force lines of the history and some laws or some inner relations between the deep phenomenon of the geopolitics, of the history, of the culture, and it is why my ideas look a bit strange or weird or extreme. But if you put them on the timeline, you could easily see that they just ahead of time, and that's all. For example, and there are the other points. So I represent very particular point of view. I am a theorist of multipolar world, multipolarity of the first political theory beyond liberalism, communism, and fascism. I reject all three main Western modern political theories, and that is my conviction. So, comparing this attitude to the ruling liberalism, you could easily understand why there is such demonization. About the Munich conference. So, first of all, we need to understand how deep changes are in the United States. That is not just new party coming to power, Republicans this time after Democrats. That is the real revolution. That is totally new world vision. And that is not about Republicans or Democrats. That is about much more profound principles of the world, of the being, of the international politics, geopolitics, ideology. Everything was put under question with Trump. And we could say that the ideology of Trumpism that has won in the US and Washington is in total contradiction to what was before, during decades. Republicans or Democrats, no important. That was a kind of unipolar global world order at the end of the history, as Fukuyama has called it. And that lasted almost 4 decades, 35 years, almost unchanged. So that was the unique global ideology, unique global political system, unique democracy, unique economical system, liberal capitalism, and the partisans or the global elites in many countries, including not only Western countries, in other countries as well, in the rest of the world, they accepted that. That was almost conventional wisdom that there is only one ideology, liberalism, and everybody should find its place in this global destiny of the humanity that was defined in the West by progressist values, by liberalism, and liberalism I consider the ideology of the liberation of the individual from any kind of collective identity, and that was taken for granted. And Trump has blown up all that. He has said no to any point you defended until now. So less than 1 month ago, there was the huge reversal, turning down, overthrown the process to overthrow this established unipolar globalist liberal truth. And all the key members of Trump's team, first of all, Vice President J.D. Vance, who came to Munich conference to explain to Europeans what this conservative revolution in the USA is about. He absolutely normally and predictably, he has encountered total misunderstanding, because that was...
I agree with you. It's a return to more like Jacksonist, isolationist. We know that after the United States was established, there are two approaches. One is Jacksonianism, which believe America should be first, should be isolate itself from the old world affairs and play major power games. And then after World War II, we know that after that is a Wilsonism. Wilsonism believes that the United States needs to establish a US-led alliance, and based this alliance, United States can establish its leadership or hegemony. And after Soviet Union integrated, Wilsonism went to the extremes. They have so-called globalism, which means that based on this US-led alliance, they should establish a liberal international order, you just said. And that international order, liberal international order, should provide a solid foundation for US hegemony. Now, Donald Trump threw all that into garbage, said, let's go back to Jacksonism. That's why they said he's a new Jacksonianism, which is American first, major power game. And of course, United States consolidate its dominance in this big island we call America. And from there, United States try to reestablish its status as a global power, one polo. And I agree with you absolutely on that. But now I want to hear from Professor Jeremy. What's your view on this Munich Security Conference? Do you agree with us or with Mr. Professor Dugin? This is a revolution, and this is upside down change? Or how?
Well, thank you very much for first of all inviting me to this discussion. It is an honor to discuss with Professor Dugin. And speaking about this particular Munich Security Conference, I'm not sure if I would agree that this particular Munich Security Conference indicated the beginning of the multipolar world. In my opinion, there was a more foundational Munich Security Conference back in 2007 when President Putin gave a speech that not just raised eyebrows, it caused locomotion in the audience. I was present there at the time. That was, in my opinion, the first clear signal of the multipolar world. President Putin was speaking about Russia's concerns with regard to how its security and generally how the interests of the Russian Federation are being treated, but particularly in the security field by the expanding NATO at that time. And perhaps that was not music for everybody's ear, but that was an indication of the emergence of multipolarity. And then a year later, in 2008, there was another strong indication that there is a multipolar world. Perhaps it was more pleasant than President Putin's speech, but that was the opening of the Beijing Olympic Games in the August of 2008, which was a spectacular ceremony, and most of the world leaders, including President Putin and President Bush, and many others, including my president, who I accompanied at that particular opening as the foreign minister of Serbia. The whole world was there, and there was a spectacular ceremony. And again, that was a very, very clear signaling that the multipolar order was there. In Munich in 2007, Russia was raising its voice. In Beijing in 2008, China was demonstrating that it is back on the global stage, and in a very, very strong way. And then maybe just a couple of weeks after the Beijing Olympics, there was a meltdown of global financial system. The Lehman Brothers crisis triggered the global financial crisis of 2008. And the big question mark that emerged out of that global financial crisis over the globalism in terms of global financial and economic network emanating out of, ideologically, if you will, Davos, and whether that was a good thing for the world, because the assumption was that the more globalization, the better. We're all getting better off, and this is the future. The global liberal capitalist networked world was the future that was going to bring prosperity to everybody. Well, that crashed like very, very significantly in the autumn of 2008. So those were I think, the founding developments indicating to the world that the global order is changing from unipolar into multipolar. And the current Munich Security Conference, the speech of J.D. Vance, the announcements of Donald Trump, and ultimately the beginning of negotiations between the United States and Russia taking place in Riyadh and continuing, if I understand well, in Riyadh, there are just the repercussions of the fact that the world has changed. I completely agree with Professor Dugin that one of the foundational elements of this change is this revolution, social, cultural. We'll see if there are other revolutions going on in the United States. The United States is by far still the most powerful single actor in the international scene. Yes, we talk about the multipolar world, but a very, very strong pole of power is the United States, and it is currently going through really dramatic convulsions and flux. So we'll see how that ends. I agree that things look pretty bleak from the perspective of the Europeans that will present in Munich. Not all Europeans. There are other Europeans who are actually feeling very enthusiastic and positive with regard to Donald Trump's stepping up and changes in America. I mean, I come from Serbia. I mean, Serbia, there is a great feeling of satisfaction and hope that these changes are taking place in America, because Serbia was suffering for many decades as a result of the ancien regime of the United States of America. But there are also many people around Europe who are actually applauding to J.D. Vance's words. The Europeans present in the room in Munich were not terribly pleased. But that's the current situation that we have. So yes, we are in the multipolar world, very deep in the multipolar world. Mind you, in my opinion, in the middle of a geopolitical recession in the multipolar world. And the geopolitical recessions, if history is a goalpost, they tend to last long, much longer cycles in geopolitics than in economics. In economics, cycles are a couple of years. In geopolitics, they usually take decades. We are in the negative phase when it comes to global cooperation. I very much hope that this revolution taking place in the United States are going to make up for the world coming out of geopolitical recession in the coming years and decades. And to that end, the US and China will play very, very important role to make sure that the world comes out of this recession.
Yeah, and I'm very glad that seems to we have more convergence rather than divergence on the issue. We all agree that we're very deep in the multipolar world, but I have to argue that it's the first time for the U.S. government to officially accept the multipolar world. Just a few years ago, we remember President Joe Biden said, United States will be the leader. His original words that if we do not play a role of leadership, who else can? In other words, he still believes it's American-led world. I'm sorry?
Can I just push back? Can I just push back for just a little bit on what you said?
Yeah.
The American leadership, the American hegemony or dominance, if you will, since the end of the Cold War until these days, right? They were based on American domination in three important fields, two of which, in my opinion, are now gone. America had a technology monopoly. The high tech was all American. I'm talking about early 90s. Now, technological monopoly, nobody can really talk about monopoly anymore. China is on par, perhaps even more advanced in certain areas than America. So technological monopoly is gone. That was number one. Number two, it was the military monopoly. And I think that Russia has successfully challenged that monopoly in Ukraine. Until this conflict in Ukraine, it was only America that was allowed to intervene as they saw fit, according to what they defined as their national interest, without any repercussions, because they could. That was the monopoly, essentially. So they could go into Iraq, they could bomb Yugoslavia, Libya could have happened, Syria, and so on and so forth. It was the exclusive privilege, the monopoly of the United States. Nobody else was supposed to do that. Now, Russia successfully challenged that monopoly in Ukraine. So this second monopoly of American dominance, the military monopoly, is gone. But the third one is still very much with us. So therefore, I still claim that America plays a super important role in today's world. And this is the monopoly of the US dollar. There is no multipolarity in the financial sphere yet.
Yeah,
the US dollar is a very, very powerful tool. And the question is, the multipolarity in the financial, in economic section, that is, I think, one of the most interesting fields in the coming years and decades.
Yeah, well, I agree with you that we are talking about the fact it's deep into multipolar world. But my point is that if United States has not or did not accept or recognize the fact it still existed that we are the leaders until Donald Trump came to power, said, look, we are no longer the leaders. We don't want to play a role of leadership. We gave it up, this multipolar world. In other words, the fact is one thing, whether the US government accepted or recognized this fact is another. That's what I'm talking about. You just mentioned another thing. I think I have a little bit different view on you. Yes, Europeans always said that it is President Putin that first broke up with the West by his speech in 2007. But I talked with President Putin myself at the Valdai conference. That's also my view. I think the really point is exactly 2008, because we know 2008, two things happened. Number one, United States deployed missile defense system in Poland and the Czech, right under the nose of Russia. That broke a strategic balance between a former Soviet Union and Russia and United States. That is something that it is very hard for Russians to swallow. Second, in that year, Georgia and Ukraine officially applied for the membership of NATO. That is also very difficult for Russia to swallow because this is kind of the buffer zone. It's no longer there. The threat is directly towards Russia. That's why in August 2008, Putin launched the Georgia war. I think that's a turning point. In 2007, he just put his words there, said, I warn you, do not push. You push me any harder, then I have to respond. But that has been read by the West. If the West really listened to Mr. Putin in 2007, they will not do what happened in 2008. 2008 is really important because I just want to make my point here. And before we go to the next topic, go on, and I would just want to hear from Professor Dugin. Do you have any response or any some other your opinions, your views on this issue?
So I think that I agree, and generally I agree with your opinions. So it seems to be quite correct, but I would like to maybe to explore more how Americans, how Trumpists, how they interpret multipolarity, because in their opinion, it is not something incompatible with American leadership or its hegemony. I agree with that. They abandoned Wilsonian attitude to be leader of democracy, to promote global liberal values and human rights on the planetarian scale. They have abandoned that, but they return not to the isolationism. They propose the new formula of American hegemony and leadership, but on totally different ideological base. It is much more the splendor and glory of American civilization that is considered to be something very, very different from globalist project. So the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again movement, it is not just the courage to return to the isolationism. That is the idea of new form of leadership, but without imposing liberal progressivist left liberal ideology and not financing liberal networks worldwide. And that creates a kind of very special concept. I am calling that. I propose to call that the great powers order. It is not just our multipolarity that recognizes the right to any civilizations to follow their course, their way. That is our understanding of multipolarity, based on even distribution of the decision-making processes through the humanity. It is a kind of very humanitarian vision shared by Russia, China, I think people in India maybe, more or less, in Africa, Latin America, Islamic world. So that was the even distribution of the center of power. That is how we interpret multipolarity. I have written some books on that, manual theory of multipolar worlds, promoting that. That coincides with ideas of Mr. Putin, Mr. Lavrov. So that is something that accepted by us. But America and Trump, he has criticized very, very severely BRICS because he doesn't agree with our interpretation of multipolarity. His multipolarity, or Rubio's multipolarity, is something very different. That is affirmation of America as the core and the center of the special civilization based on national supremacy, the supremacy and the leadership of America as national great power, as empire, that the old talks about 51st state of Canada and Greenland are not just talks. That is a kind of huge integrational project, comparable with Belt and Road Initiative, but in the sense of the direct imperialism and hegemony, and not as any kind of China of win-win strategy. China is totally different, but idea is to make the great zone of control over the space in the geopolitical, financial, economical interests, and that is still hegemony, that is still leadership, that is still some kind of unipolarity, but with totally different content. That's how I interpret Trump's desires, Trump's vision, but objectively, I agree with both of you, objectively, that leads to the multipolarity. But now we should confront about the meaning of it, about the concrete balance of powers inside of this multipolar worlds. For example, I have spoken thanks to my Chinese colleagues with Mearsheimer recently, John Mearsheimer. He is advocate of the great powers order. He doesn't recognize, for example, existence of Indian civilization or civilizational state. He just accept United States, China, and Russia as three existing great powers. Between that, these powers should all the other should be decided on the competition, coalitions, alliances, confrontation. So I think Americans have a very different interpretation of the multipolarity.
Yeah, I know John very well. I know his point, but the one thing I want to I beg to disagree with a little bit. I think that for Donald Trump take a unilateral approach in global affairs. Unilateralism doesn't mean he still thinks the United States is a hegemon. Of course, it's amazing. It's shocking for me to hear him at the inaugural speech be such a total naked imperialism. I want Greenland. I want Panama. Now we have American president in the inaugural speech in 21st century claim the kind of ownership of a sovereignty nation. To me, that's unbelievable. But anyway, I have to bring us back to the topic I really want to discuss with you two gentlemen, that is Ukraine war. In my view, this is a very important conflict. Its importance is that it began to reshape the kind of world we know. Of course, there are two different narratives, totally different. One narrative is, I can understand, that Russia is an invader. It's an invasion. And that therefore, never before, ever since World War II, did I see that the entire Europe have such a solidarity against Russia. They really want to stop Putin because they know that if they do not stop this aggression or invasion by Mr. Putin, then we're all going back to 19th century or even worse. So they seems to be determined to push back. But the other narrative, of course, is from totally different perspective. And I remember I read this article, I don't know if you read or not, a long one by my good friend Sergei Garaganov, published in Russian Global Affairs, September 2022. Basically, his argument is that this war is not about Ukraine at all. It's about the future of Russia, a future of Slavic nation. Because he argued, from his point of view, I can see it, that is the so-called international order or West order led by United States has become very negative, not only for global peace and stability, but has become more and more an instrument for United States try to weaken and eventually destroy Russia and Slavic nation. So therefore, this onslaught by Russia is not really against Ukraine, it's against US-led Western international order, so that not only they can save Russia and Slavic nation, but also try to reestablish a more fair and peaceful international order vis-a-vis this international order led by United States and used by United States for its own gains. That's two different narratives. One, of course, let me repeat, is a pure invasion, unjust, bad, and has to be stopped. The other thing is the kind of self-defense, not only to defend Russia itself, but also try to attack or even try to destroy this bad international order, which has been utilized by United States for its hegemony at other expenses. So there's totally two different narratives. No matter how different they are, the fact is, we know this war really indeed reshaped or began to reshape the international order, the global order that we know. That's why we're here. So I want to hear from you gentlemen, how do you see this war? And based on that, how do you think is a fair or possible solution for this disaster or tragedy?
Well, let me take a crack at it first. I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as Professor Dugin when it comes to the roots of this, and there are very deep civilizational, I'd say, foundations as to what we're discussing right now. I just must observe first, before I dive in, about the interpretation of the conflict in Ukraine, or the phase of the conflict that started in 2022 as like some kind of a precedent of, attack on an independent sovereign nation with the explicit aim of carving out part of its territory in Europe after the Second World War. I mean, I come from Serbia, so we have witnessed an attack in 1999. It was an attack of the entire NATO alliance. It proved to be with the explicit aim of carving out part of the territory of Serbia, which is called Kosovo, the autonomous province of Kosovo and Metohija, that as a result of the Western military intervention, by the way, not sanctioned by the UN Security Council. In terms of the UN Charter, there are only legal military use of force internationally when you have sanctioned that by the UN Security Council. Well, in 1999, that does not happen. And the UN Security Council did not approve NATO intervention. NATO intervened in Serbia and essentially ended up partitioning the sovereign territory of Serbia. So I can hardly think of a precedent when it comes to whatever is going on in Ukraine. But then again, as I said, there are deep historical and civilizational roots to it. However, in terms of the consequences of this, as I said, the fact that Russia was not broken, and it was a very, very strong attempt by the West, by the political West, led by the, if you will, old government, the ancien regime in Washington, pushing against Russia by supporting financially and militarily Ukraine, by imposing drastic sanctions on the Russian economy. Russia did not break under that pressure, and it seems that most of Russia's demands prior to 2022 are going to be met. We'll see how these negotiations end, but so far it seems like there's a decently good understanding on the American side, on the current American side, on Russia's concerns in these negotiations. So the first consequence of the Ukraine, of the conflict in Ukraine, is that there is no more monopoly of the use of force, monopoly of America or the political West in the use of force around the world in order to advance one's national security interest. The second thing is the future of world's finance. I'm getting back to that. And I'm getting back to the discussions of Trump and whether it's a Jacksonian withdrawal into isolation and the recognition of the multipolarity. I'm much closer to Professor Dugin's interpretation of this. I do think that the new America wants to maintain its hegemonic position in the world, and most obviously so in the field of finance. President Trump actually, amongst the many things that he had said since the inauguration, said in a very blunt terms, very blatant terms, if you will, those who want to think about the replacing of the US dollar in international trade are going to be met with 100% tariffs by the United States. And BRICS in particular, he actually emphasized the BRICS in particular. If BRICS dare go on with this project of creating an alternative payment system to US dollar, they're going to be facing all the American might. So in that sense, I mean, the way I read it is that America is very much interested in maintaining the hegemony when it comes to the global economic order and the position of the dollar. So the consequence of the Ukraine war in this context, because that was the question that you asked, is that dollar was weaponized against Russia in an attempt to break Russia's position and to make Russia withdraw from what Russia wanted to do in Ukraine, imposing of the sanctions and so on and so forth. Well, that did not work. That did not work according to the expectations. So the big question mark is whether dollar is indeed so powerful, and whether can one, despite all the threats of Donald Trump and I don't know who else, whether can one really think about a future in which there is an alternative payment system to dollars. And then I must say, all eyes are on China, because China is the world economic power that is on par with the United States. And without China's central or even leading role in building of this alternative architecture, financial architecture, payment, global payments architecture, without China, it is very, very difficult to conceive it. The consequence of the war in Ukraine was that, well, even dollar is not that powerful to push countries like Russia into doing what the dollar wants them to do. Okay, it's not as powerful, but what is the future? Is there going to be an alternative to the US dollar? Is it going to be digital? Is it going to be crypto? I don't know. I don't have answers to these questions. I'm not an economist.
Okay, Professor Dugin?
So I think that you have explained very well two readings of special military operation, defense, as explained by Karaganov, that represents our common point of view, the point of view of Russia, of Putin, of myself. So that is common understanding, common reading in Russia and in the eyes of the friends of Russia worldwide. And there is as well a European or Western reading. So that was invasion, aggression, annexation, and so on. What is interesting in my opinion? So it is absolutely useless to debate what point of view is correct, because that depends on the situation. So that if you are Russian or for multipolarity, you are on the side of Russia. Wrong or right Russian deeds are. If you are on the side of the globalism, of the unipolarity, of the Western hegemony, Russia is criminal. Notwithstanding who has begun this situation. What is interesting, in my opinion, now that there is the huge split in this second Western reading of the Ukrainian conflict, because we have no more unified collective West with sharing this attitude, Russia is aggressor. So Trump yesterday has affirmed in his post that Russia is not aggressor. So Zelensky has provoked, with the help of Biden and the European Union, has provoked this war. He has blamed Zelensky, globalists, Europe, and Biden administration for this war. In that sense, he has shown clearly that he shares Trumpist administration in general. Trumpism as ideology shares Karaganov's point of view. That is our point of view. And that is extremely important. And when he started to declare audit of help to Ukraine, when he started to blame Zelensky for foul game with the money he has received, when J.D. Vance came to the Munich conference and to say to the globalist European leaders, stop, blame Russia and China. Your main enemy, you are yourselves, your main enemy. Globalist elite is responsible for all the problems you European globalists have. That was, everything was in total harmony. So Trumpist administrations accepts Russian narrative and Russian reading of the special military operations. So there are not only one West with their Western globalist, liberal, pro-Zelensky, Putin's aggression reading. There are two narratives in the West. American, let Russia alone, let Zelensky alone. If you want to fight this war, Europe, do that, but without us. And he has proposed to withdraw from NATO, to make tariffs on Europe. So that is totally different reading now. And that is why Europe and Zelensky were not invited in a Riyadh meeting with American-Russian delegations. So Europe and Ukraine are out from the horizon of Russian-American new relations. So Trump wants abandon Ukraine and maybe Europe, and Europe defense and Europe security. It is no more the problem of United States. That is European problem. United States is much more interested in securing their inner new order, Trump's new order, to make a new acquisition of territories, annexing Canada and Greenland, taking the control over Panama Channel, and to help Netanyahu to destroy Palestine. That is agenda of Trump. Russia and Ukraine are not in the first, second, or the third point. That is 12th point, and so Trump simply does not care about Zelensky and Ukraine. And in order to put a global discourse, global narrative in the symphony, in the harmony of his attitude, he now started to blame with Musk, with Vance, with everybody else, blame Zelensky for this war. That is, I think, momentum we are now. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very important because Europe now, it is not a collective West against Russia. That is Russia and United States somehow against globalist Europe, but not against European government who that are in favor either of Russia or Trump. And what is interesting, all European leaders who are in favor of Trump are more or less in favor of Putin. All European leaders who are in favor of Putin are more or less in favor of Trump. So there is not two vision of Europe, American Trumpists and Russian Putins. There is the same project of how to make Europe great again, mega, that Putin and Trump share both. So that is interesting. So for us, Europe should be Orban, Fico, Meloni, Marine Le Pen, AfD, Nigel Farage, Geert Wilders, and Helen Georgescu. That is our Europe. It is how Russia would like Europe to be. But it is exactly the same image that is promoted by Musk, by X.com, so by Trump's administration, by Tulsi Gabbard, by Robert Kennedy, by Kash Patel, by Gates, by everybody. So that is interesting. It is not just some separate slogans of Trump or some other people. There are the total collusion in some way of attitude of Trump and Putin to Europe. So we coincide regarding Europe totally. So Ukraine is the only problem that is really painful for us. Not so much for Europe, by Europe, because I don't think that Russia represents real danger for European Union. It is just propaganda, globalist liberal propaganda, and Serbia as well. Serbia, Hungary, Italy, populist party in France, Germany, Netherlands, Britain. So we have coinciding image of what we want from Europe on both sides. No war, but no confrontation, but independence from the globalist discourse.
Yes, I think that there's a little point I beg to disagree with you, Professor Dukin. I do believe that how to settle or solve the Ukraine conflict is one of the top priority of President Trump. Otherwise, he would not send his strong team to Europe and also to Riyadh. We know that ever since he came into office, this is the first thing he wants to solve. That means it is important to him. What we see here, I agree with you that we see a deep division between left and right, between conservatism and liberalism, not only in the United States, but also in Europe. But at least right now, the liberal establishment in Europe strongly disagree with Donald Trump. So my question here is, can we see the end of this war? Can the Ukraine war be ended in Trump's term or in Putin's term? Because we do see a very strong liberal establishment in Europe who vowed to continue their support to Zelensky as long as he wants to fight. We see the speech by Prime Minister of Great Britain, who says we are going to continue. We also see the Macron and the others who have a roundtable, seems that they're very defiant against Donald Trump. Even Zelensky seems to be very defiant. He said without participation of Ukraine, any agreement will not be accepted, so on and so forth. And of course, we also have Donald Trump seems to determine to bring the end to this war. But so my question is that given the situation that we know, can we really end this war the way Donald Trump wanted? Number one. Number two, does Mr. Putin would accept Donald Trump's offer, or he wants something more? And so finally, this is a kind of issue we have to discuss. That is, for example, in the next 3 months, 6 months, or 1 month, can we bring this war to the end? If we can, how feasible is a plan on the table right now seems to you too? I mean, Professor Jeremish and Professor Tukin.
Well, first of all, we don't know what exactly is on the table. We have some principled notion and positions being spelled out by Russia and by the American side. So we still don't know what is the detailed proposal. I personally think that this war can be brought to a quick end, and I very much hope that this is going to be brought to a quick end. I was listening carefully to Minister Lavrov, what he was saying a day ago, and he said we are in agreement on most important things. He would not have said that if it weren't possible to iron out in relatively short time the points of disagreement. So I think it is possible. I pray that it happens. Then again, it might not, because of the things that Professor Huang noted. Some European countries and President Zelensky himself not willing to play ball. If Ukraine refuses this proposal that is possibly going to be joint US-Russian proposal, then there's going to be another tragic episode in fighting, which is going to have, God knows how many more lives be lost on the front line. And then eventually, after that tragic...
How about the regime change in Ukraine? Like President Donald Trump already said, he has to go.
I personally think it is either going to be a relatively quick end or an end following a tragic episode. This tragic episode will be life lost on the front, possibly government change in Kiev, peacefully or not so peacefully, I don't know. But the end game is going to be the same. So I very much hope that the end game comes now, as opposed to coming later after many more people have died and more locomotion did take place. So that's my take on it, and in my appeal on I'm not representing any side here. I'm just a professor, but I'm also in a way like a global public opinion coming from a country that is essentially a global South country. I actually appeal on the main actors in this new multipolar world to listen to each other more, to engage with each other more, and to avoid such tragic misunderstandings like the one that it had led to the 2022 phase of conflict in Ukraine, with a huge number of lives lost and huge dislocations to the global economy. I can only imagine how difficult and more devastating such conflict and misunderstandings would be in the case of East Asia. And I just hope we are not going to be witnesses of such misunderstandings.
Okay, before we go to Professor Dugins, I just want to make myself a little bit clear on my point. I think I agree with you that Professor Jeremish, if we have a quick end to this war to avoid a bigger tragedy. But if we have a quick end, then it seems that we have to victimize Ukraine, or more specifically, maybe victimize Zelensky himself. And Europe, as we know, the establishment have to make a huge compromise, not only on the interest, but on the values. Basically, they have to accept that Russia is not a threat to Europe, that we agree that what Russian got is what they get. So this is a huge setback in terms of so-called European opinion or European interest or so on and so forth. Is that something they're going to accept, or they're going to be forced to accept because, they're being on the menu, not on the table anymore? That's the issue, right? Blinken just said,
but there I agree with Professor Dugin.
Looks like Europe and Ukraine is on menu right now.
Yeah, but like the same thing would have applied to the United States if, say, President Trump did not win the elections. It would be difficult for the Americans. Now it is difficult for this current leadership in the majority of European states. But there are other leaders, as Professor Dugin said, in Europe, who have different worldview, who would not see this as a tragic development, the fact that the war had come to an end. So I think that there will be political processes in Europe in the coming years, which will be bringing more and more to the fore those political forces in Europe that do not feel that this was a tragedy.
Okay. Professor Dugin?
So I think that there is solution. We should overthrow globalist liberal governments in Europe. Everything is simple now. So there is no more the West, collective West. In the collective West, the main, the absolute majority of the power was power of United States in any senses. And Europe was just a small province of this collective West, just a frontier to be used. And now there is the huge Trump's Bolshevist, conservative Bolshevist revolution in Washington, and this province didn't yet understand the seriousness of the changes in the metropole and the capital. So they are not the leader on the equal, for example, Macron, Starmer, or Merz, or Scholz. They are not on the level of Trump. They could not, collectively, with Ursula von der Leyen, or Kaja Kallas, they represent a small part of the people working for the boss. And the boss is changed in the center. So they are not on equal term, neither with the United States nor with us. They are just the rests of the previous structure. So European leaders, they are more or less, in our opinions, like Zelensky. They are just puppets, just bloody clowns, and we don't care about them anymore. We could afford the war with Europe without serious problem. What we could not afford, really, that is the direct confrontation with the United States of America. That would be catastrophic for us. With the conventional weapon, we could not afford to win, so we would be obliged to use nuclear weapon, and that will mean the end of the humanity. So if the United States is out, so on the geopolitical level, relations with Ukraine and with European Union is totally different, absolutely different in any senses in the energy. And when the European leaders, when they finally when they finally understand the deep changes in the relations between the United States and Europe, they will immediately stop all the aid for Ukraine. So we need only one thing, time. We shouldn't be too hasty in solving this crisis. We should postpone it as long as possible in order to get to European leaders the time to take in consideration the huge changes on the world scale that are brought by Trump in the world. So now they still seem to be something. In the reality, European leaders are no more anything. So, and I think that is totally that we need totally reform all the European spaces, maybe dismantle European Union, and I think the Europe will choose in that moment to stay more with Russia or more with United States, and this choice, that is the choice of tomorrow. Today they are still living in the kind of phantom pain of the previous global order, when the big boss was on their side and was their masters. They are just pupils of kind of slaves of the master that is already changed, and they couldn't understand that the inertia is too big, but that is all. So Europe, liberal Europe, it is as good as dead. So new Europe will appear on this place sooner or later. The sooner the better for Europe and for everybody else. But I think that the days of Zelensky are counted. He doesn't represent anything. So he is abandoned by the main, not ally, by master. He is abandoned by master. He is just a small soldier in the field, totally betrayed by the general. General is occupying some other territories. So his fate is he is doomed, and everything time will do. The only thing we should not hasten, we should not expect too soon the results. In my opinion, Ukraine was not in the center of the talks in the Riyadh, not at all. So there were so many things to speak between two great powers. So Ukraine was discussed, but there is no rapid solution. So we need to take a common detail. We need to America needs time to blame Zelensky until to equal him to zero, to some war criminal, in order to get rid of him easier. And the same with Europe. I think we need some months until Europe will be insulted. You are European. Europhobia will replace Russophobia. And I think the situation in some months regarding the speed of the reforms of Trump will so totally different that our predictions and our discussion could be laughable, because we are speaking as if the world is the same. The world is already different.
Yeah, I got your point, Professor Dugin. That is, the masters has changed. So they have abandoned the allies or whatever, their followers. But those followers, like Europeans, still think that, like yesterday's story, they are no longer they're useless, no longer useful, but they still hang on user structure. But I want to hear from Professor Jeremish on this point. Is that the liberal establishment of Europe being totally abandoned by the masters, the new masters?
You guys, this was a fascinating closure of Professor Dugin, the change of gear toward the end. I wish we had more time to debate and with this energy and with this fervor. I agree that the liberal elites in Europe are right now in a not so sweet spot. Henry Kissinger once famously said that it is dangerous to be America's adversary, but being America's ally can be fatal. And I think that the current European structures are living through this Kissingerian prediction of how things can turn wrong in relations with America. I found Professor Dugin's closure fascinating. I'm not sure if I could agree with everything that he had said, as well as the Freudian, I believe, slip. Once, instead of Zelensky, Professor Dugin said Brzezinski, but I know exactly what he meant, and that linkage I can understand. I'm not sure if the situation is so black and white, and I'm not sure that the conclusion of the hot phase of the conflict in Ukraine could lead to the entire unraveling of the global order. I'm not even sure that it'd be optimal for the world, that all the structures of the old order disappear overnight, like the United Nations, for instance, which we, coming from small countries, would very much hope to save and preserve in a certain shape and form. We also haven't spoken too much about China's role in this thing. I believe that China's role would be very important in making sure that the end of the conflict in Ukraine remains the end. China is a very, very consequential global player. I think that the future of Eurasia cannot be imagined without a leading, and not hegemonic, but important leading in a Chinese win-win spirit engagement of China. I personally very much hope that towards the end of the negotiation phase on Ukraine, there is going to be a Security Council resolution adopted in the United Nations mandating that peace, that nobody is going to use veto power to vote against that resolution, and that China is going to be an important part of the implementing of whatever is agreed and enshrined in this UN Security Council resolution, demonstrating that the UN is still there, perhaps in a different form than in the 20th century, but still there, and the guarantor of rights of small countries, that right to exist, right to seek justice, or ask the big countries to uphold the rules. This is perhaps something not innate to the big power thinking, not something that I don't know, Professor Mearsheimer would spend too much time thinking about, but 3/4 of the world do come from the countries that are part of the global South and that do not have nuclear missiles. I'm trying to represent those in this conversation.
I can see your point, Professor Jeremish. But the problem is that since Donald Trump came to power, especially on this Ukraine war, he has not mentioned even once, no mention at all about United Nations, UN. He doesn't want to play the game in UN. It's obvious. Whether this Ukraine war or Ukraine conflict, this tragedy can bring to an end in whoever's term or whoever's favor, my view is that Donald Trump has played a new game. The old game we know is that United States, based on so-called transatlantic bridge, which is American and European alliance, try to dominate in global affairs. That's why we have this war. But now it looks like very clear to me, Donald Trump does not want this transatlantic bridge anymore. He does not want the so-called alliance system anymore. He focused on major powers. In other words, he wants to return to Jacksonianism to play a major power game in which he tried to maneuver or manipulate interactions among the major powers so that to achieve a strategic balance in America's favor. If he's doing that, then Russia actually is very important in his game because Russia is the only one that locates in Eurasia. If United States and Russia's relationship can be reconciliated in a way that two countries become cooperate or coordinate with each other again, to the west, he can control Atlantic. To the east, can contain China, which he still thinks is United States' only adversary or threat. So that's how the big game, the game of big powers, I think in Donald Trump's eyes, going to play. And so my question is that, number one, do you think Donald Trump can get what he wants? To manipulate the so-called major power relations? Because after he came to the office, he does not give a damn to Europe or European countries. 3 people he has get in touch with very closely. Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping of China, and Modi was in Washington, D.C. just a few days ago, and now President Putin. Look like Donald Trump only want to play the game with China, Russia, India. That's all. Ukraine conflict is just a cutting point he uses as a leverage to cut in. And his purpose, in my view, is not just to solve the Ukraine war, but to get close again with Russia. So therefore, he could put America in a more advantageous position. In this regard, Russia has the most geopolitical or geostrategic positions in Donald Trump's game. So I don't know if you agree with me or not. Therefore, we can bring China in. But of course, here, I want to hear from you, a professor's point of view. Do you think that Donald Trump and go back to Jacksonian's approach. No international order, no alliance, just America as a major power trying to manipulate the other major powers, 3 of them, so that to gain advantageous position in the so-called new international affair or new international order. If there is an order, we can still discuss about. Obviously, he doesn't want the United Nations at all.
Dear colleagues, unfortunately, I have only 10 minutes left. Sorry for that, because if you don't mind, I agree totally with what you have said. Totally agreed. You're absolutely right. The problem is, for sure, Trump will try, and already is trying, to do exactly what you have described, to have better relations with Russia in order to manipulate this global great powers order in favor of United States of America. And he has all the rights and all the reasons to do that. But that doesn't mean that everybody, the other great powers, Russia, China, India, Islamic world, in the next step, Africa and Latin America, will follow these orders. If that is the relations of the equals, not of the equals of all nation states recognized by United Nations as sovereign. That is hypocrisy. That is nothing of the sort exists in the geopolitics. That Mearsheimer sees very well, and everybody who is concerned by geopolitics sees very well. Sovereignty is hypocrisy. So in order to have the real sovereignty, you should be a great power, or you should join. If you are a small nation, for example, for Serbia, it's clear. Join Russia and you will be safe. So when Russia will be great, Serbia will be great as well and safe, and Kosovo will be returned to Serbia, and China will be our friends. So the other things that the distribution of power between these great powers, and I think that Putin will never abandon China. Never, and never will betray China, because China is the pillar of multipolarity. Without China, without greatness of the China, the growth of the China, independence and the real geopolitical sovereignty of the China, Russia will be so vulnerable in front of the West, in front of USA. That is the just national interests to maintain the best possible relations with China. At the same time, Russia, I doubt that Russia would play, for example, on the side of China against India. I don't think so. I think that Russia will still keep good relations with India as well as the other civilizational state. So that is, I think that Putin shares more or less the Chinese wisdom, win-win. So we are good friends of China, and we will never betray China as the pillar of multipolarity, because we believe in multipolarity. Yes. We could be. So that is idea. So, but not against. Trump considers that as zero-sum strategy. If you are with us, you should be against our enemies. And Putin shares Chinese Confucianist understanding of even distribution, fair distribution of the power. So I think United Nations will be dismantled sooner or later. They doesn't represent anymore the real balance of the global power, and new international world order will be created in decades, maybe sooner or later. I could not say exact date, but I think that the huge changes in the world could not be reduced to the existing old, obsolete structures that reflect the previous balance of power. There is the huge geopolitical revolution. China will be one of the most important players in competition, in alliances, today competition, tomorrow after that maybe strategical opponent in different situation, but the world will be remanaged, reshaped by these global powers. And I think the sincerity of Trump's discourse that you have mentioned at the beginning of our debates, it is not about his impolite behavior on the diplomatic level. That is naked geopolitics. So we need to speak in the naked geopolitical language. So that is my last words, and I thank you very much for inviting me. And in 5 minutes, I have to go out.
Okay, since I have only 5 minutes,
I'm gonna try and close.
Professor
so that we
Jeremy, you
close
have the
together.
final words. Please be brief.
Thank you Thank you very
Floor
much. And I find it very fascinating the Professor Dugin's closing argument, and I agree with him in a sense that the current structures of the international global governance do not reflect the actual division of power. And this is actually when a geopolitical recession, in my opinion, occurs, when the rules of the road no longer reflect the realities of the road. And then the question is, what can you do in such situations? I believe that there are three things that can be done under such circumstances. One is to reform the existing institutions so that they better reflect the realities of the moment. The second thing is build new institutions. You decide that the old ones are obsolete, that they cannot be fixed, and therefore you start building new organizations, not necessarily global. They could be regional, but they also could be global that, serve better their member states than the old obsolete ones. And then the third thing is take the matter, if you're in your own hands, if you have power to do that, and then go and do it yourself. And those are the three things that in the future, I think, will be tried concurrently. Some efforts will be invested in reforming the international organizations. I personally believe that China will be one of the leading actors in trying to reform the global institutions, because China has deep interest in maintaining parts of the global order that made it so prosperous in the past several decades. Second, some new institutions will be built or strengthened, and BRICS is one of those institutions that was relatively new, and I believe
Jeremy,
will be given more.
I have to cut you because our time is up. And I agree with you that I think three of us.
I do.
We agree with.
But I gotta say at the end, because we have 2 more minutes, if I understand.
You have to give me 1 minute.
When it comes to the small countries, we have history, which is not as perhaps long and glorious as the history of the big powers. And in our history, alliances have been, sometimes work gloriously well, and sometimes small countries feel abandoned by their allies. So that's a part of our historical thing. And when it comes to China and Russia and the future of their relationship, I mean, both of you are civilization states. So you know each other well. You have had good times and not so good times, and I'm sure you're going to be able to make your own decisions on how to work together in the future, being mindful and cautious of your historical experience with each other.
Okay. I think three of us, because time, we have to bring our discussion to an end. We can continue later. As three of us would agree with one point, that is, we are entering into a new era. Like it or not. In this new era, in my view, the most fundamental change is that 4 global powers, United States, China, Russia, India, 3 of them are in the global south. This is unprecedented. The Western power, only 1 left, the United States. The other 3 are global south. And more importantly, all the 3 major powers, China, Russia, India, are in BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperative Organizations, which means the 3 big powers have more institutional guarantees to talk and coordinate with each other. And thank God, their relationship is not driven by conflict or by war, unlike the previous. The previous great power relations are driven by conflict, by war. That's why we have World War I, World War II, Cold War, and Ukraine war. I think maybe that's where the hope is. That is the three major powers, China, India, and Russia, they try to work together rather than work against each other. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
非常感谢大家今天晚上的观看，我们下次直播再见。